Hello fellow boomers, welcome back to our channel. Artificial intelligence is reshaping nearly every aspect of our lives, but what does it mean for democracy itself? Today we're diving deep into one of the most pressing questions of our time, exploring how AI is fundamentally threatening the foundations of democratic society. Drawing from the groundbreaking book Why AI Undermines Democracy, written by Mark Zuckerberg from a philosopher of technology perspective, this video will take you through the critical ways that AI is being weaponized against the very systems we rely on to protect our freedoms. We'll be examining the dangerous spread of misinformation and how AI makes it faster, cheaper, and more convincing than ever before. We will uncover the sophisticated manipulation tactics employed to influence public opinion and sway elections. We'll look at how surveillance technologies are eroding privacy and enabling authoritarian control. And we'll investigate the enormous unchecked power that big tech companies now hold over our information landscape. With autocracies around the world actively using these tools to consolidate power, the urgency to understand and protect democracy has never been greater. So stay with us, because what you're about to learn genuinely matters for the future of free societies everywhere. Every section of this video builds on the last, and without understanding the threats in full, the solutions simply won't make sense. So make sure you watch it through. If you believe democracy is worth protecting, drop a comment below telling us which threat worries you most. Hit like to help spread this message, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Throughout human history, the relationship between technology and power has followed a remarkably consistent pattern. Ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt were among the first to discover that controlling information and computational systems meant controlling people. These early societies developed sophisticated accountancy techniques, census systems, and administrative technologies that allowed centralized authorities to track resources, manage populations, and consolidate enormous power. The ability to calculate, record, and process information was never just a neutral administrative tool. It was fundamentally an instrument of governance and control. Even the great philosopher Plato recognized this dynamic, arguing that the ideal state should be steered by specially trained guardians, essentially technocrats who possessed superior knowledge and would guide society like a captain navigating a ship. This vision of enlightened technical experts wielding power over ordinary citizens represents one of history's earliest articulations of AI-like governance philosophy. The parallels to our modern moment are striking and deeply unsettling. Today's artificial intelligence systems are simply the latest and most powerful iteration of this ancient pattern, where those who control the most sophisticated information processing technologies gain unprecedented advantages in centralizing authority, managing populations, and ultimately determining who holds power and who remains subject to it. To truly understand how AI threatens democracy, we first need to grapple with what democracy actually means, because not all definitions are created equal. The thinnest and most procedural understanding of democracy reduces it simply to voting, the mechanical aggregation of individual preferences into collective decisions. But political philosophers have long argued that this minimalist view misses something absolutely essential. Richer, more substantive theories of democracy, rooted in deliberative and participative traditions, insist that genuine democracy requires much more than just casting ballots. These deeper ideas, which come from Aristotle and the larger Republican philosophical tradition, stress that real self-rule depends on educated, informed citizens who are involved in public life, openly debate ideas, and hold those in power accountable. The Republican tradition, stretching from ancient Athens through modern political philosophy, consistently argues that citizens must possess genuine knowledge and critical thinking capacities to participate authentically in democratic governance. Representative democracy, in this richer understanding, is not simply about electing officials every few years. It fundamentally requires an informed citizenry capable of evaluating their representatives. understanding complex policy questions, and actively participating in the ongoing conversation that keeps power honest. Without these conditions, democracy becomes an empty procedural shell rather than genuine collective self-governance. Perhaps nowhere is AI's threat to democracy more viscerally apparent than in the manipulation of elections themselves. The most chilling and well-documented example of weaponizing personal data to undermine democratic processes is the Cambridge Analytica scandal. By harvesting the private Facebook data of tens of millions of users without their knowledge or consent, Cambridge Analytica built extraordinarily detailed psychological profiles of voters across multiple countries. These profiles were then used to micro-target individuals with precisely tailored political messaging designed to exploit personal vulnerabilities, reinforce existing biases, and ultimately manipulate voting behavior on a massive scale. What made this operation so profoundly anti-democratic was its fundamental deception. Citizens believed they were making free, informed political choices, while actually being systematically manipulated by sophisticated algorithmic targeting. And this scandal, as shocking as it was, may represent only the beginning. This year has seen historic numbers of elections globally, and AI capabilities have advanced dramatically since Cambridge Analytica operated. The tools for psychological profiling, targeted manipulation, and synthetic media creation are now cheaper, more powerful, and more widely accessible than ever before. The foundational democratic promise of free and fair elections faces an unprecedented technological threat that our current institutions remain dangerously unprepared to address. Beyond electoral manipulation, AI poses a deeper and more insidious threat to the very values that make democracy meaningful. One of the most alarming aspects of AI-driven manipulation is precisely how invisibly it operates, working beneath the threshold of conscious awareness to shape our preferences, beliefs, and decisions before we even realize our thinking is being influenced. This systematic undermining of personal autonomy fundamentally undermines democratic freedom, as genuine self-governance necessitates citizens capable of independent thought and truly informed decision-making. Algorithmic unfairness compounds this problem significantly. AI systems built on historically biased data perpetuate and amplify existing inequalities, creating profound power asymmetries between ordinary citizens and the enormous technology companies that control these systems. Justice and equal treatment under the law become increasingly hollow promises when algorithmic decisions about employment, credit, housing, and criminal justice consistently disadvantage already marginalized communities. Perhaps most corrosively, AI-driven social media platforms deliberately engineer filter bubbles and outrage cycles that systematically erode the epistemic virtues democracy desperately needs. Tolerance, fraternity, good faith, disagreement, and shared commitment to truth are not optional democratic luxuries. They are absolute prerequisites for collective self-governance, and algorithmically optimized polarization is destroying them with terrifying efficiency and remarkable deliberate precision. The erosion of social trust represents perhaps the most philosophically profound way that AI threatens democratic society, and the great political philosopher Hannah Arendt provides us with a chilling framework for understanding exactly why this matters so desperately. Arendt's seminal examination of totalitarianism pinpointed social isolation and the methodical erosion of collective trust as the fundamental prerequisites that enabled authoritarian movements to attain power during the 20th century. When citizens lose confidence in shared institutions, shared facts, and shared community bonds, they become uniquely vulnerable to manipulation by demagogues offering simple answers to complex problems. Artificial intelligence is accelerating precisely this kind of social fragmentation with unprecedented speed and scale. Algorithmic systems that optimize for engagement systematically destroy the shared knowledge bases and common informational foundations that functioning democracy absolutely requires. When citizens inhabit completely separate informational realities, constructed and maintained by AI-driven content recommendation systems. Meaningful democratic deliberation becomes virtually impossible. The public sphere, that essential democratic space where citizens reason together about common concerns, fragments into countless isolated bubbles of mutually incomprehensible worldviews. Arendt warned us that this kind of atomization and trust erosion historically preceded authoritarian takeover. Looking at our current AI-driven informational landscape, her warnings feel less like history and increasingly like urgent contemporary prophecy, demanding immediate serious attention. Understanding the threats that AI poses to democracy is only meaningful if we can identify concrete institutional responses capable of actually addressing them. One of the most important reforms we urgently need involves creating permanent, robust institutional bridges between technology experts and democratically elected representatives. The current model, where governments reactively scramble to form temporary advisory councils only after technological crises have already emerged, is fundamentally inadequate for the speed and complexity of AI development. What democracy requires instead are permanent mediating institutions that continuously translate between scientific and technological knowledge and the democratic decision-making processes that must ultimately govern these powerful systems. These bodies need genuine authority and ongoing influence, not merely consultative roles that powerful tech companies can easily ignore or capture. We must also seriously interrogate the extraordinary concentration of power that has accumulated within a handful of enormous private technology companies. The question of who owns and controls AI infrastructure is not merely an economic question, but a fundamentally democratic one. Proactive intervention at the actual stages of AI development, embedding democratic values and accountability mechanisms into these systems before they cause irreversible damage, is infinitely preferable to panicked regulation attempting to close barn doors long after the horses have already escaped into the wider world. Having examined the profound threats AI poses to democracy, it is equally important to recognize that this technology is not an unstoppable natural force beyond human control. Artificial intelligence is fundamentally a human-made tool, reflecting human choices, human values, and human priorities at every stage of its design and deployment. This means it remains genuinely open to democratic intervention and conscious redirection toward truly beneficial purposes. When deliberately designed with democratic values at their core, AI systems could actually strengthen and innovate deliberative democratic processes in remarkable ways. Imagine AI tools that help citizens access complex policy information in genuinely understandable formats, that facilitate large-scale participatory deliberation across geographic boundaries, or that help identify common ground among deeply divided communities. These possibilities are not naive utopian fantasies, but realistic applications when democratic accountability is built into development processes from the very beginning. The critical intervention point occurs precisely during the AI development stage, prior to the deployment of systems and the solidification of entrenched interests around existing designs. By making sure that AI development includes democratic values, principles for the common good, and real public accountability from the start, we can start to shift this very powerful technology away from benefiting a few private interests and instead help strengthen democratic self-governance for everyone. As we search for an overarching philosophical framework capable of guiding humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence, the concept of digital humanism offers a genuinely compelling and historically grounded vision. Drawing inspiration from the Renaissance humanist tradition and the Enlightenment values that ultimately gave birth to modern democracy itself, digital humanism proposes that we consciously integrate these deep wells of human wisdom into our navigation of the digital age. Renaissance humanism placed human dignity, critical reasoning, and the flourishing of human potential at the absolute center of civilization's aspirations. Enlightenment thinkers extended these commitments into political philosophy, arguing that reason, education, and informed citizenship were the foundations of legitimate governance. Digital humanism insists these values must now be carried forward into our technological moment. We must honestly acknowledge that traditional humanistic culture, built around deep reading, sustained reflection, and print-based knowledge transmission, must thoughtfully evolve rather than simply resist new technological realities. However, the genuinely positive potential of AI within a renewed humanistic cultural framework remains remarkably underdeveloped and underexplored in mainstream public conversation. We have barely begun the serious societal debate about how artificial intelligence could serve genuine human flourishing rather than undermining it, and that conversation needs to begin with considerable urgency right now. If digital humanism provides the philosophical vision for navigating the AI age democratically, then education reform represents the most essential practical pathway toward actually realizing that vision. One of AI's most damaging effects on democracy is the radical fragmentation of our shared public sphere, the dissolution of common informational foundations that citizens need to reason together about collective challenges. To put an end to this fragmentation, we need to completely rethink how we teach people from childhood to adulthood. Our current educational systems are poorly equipped to develop the integrated critical thinking capacities that democratic citizenship in the AI age genuinely demands, as they are largely organized around rigid subject separations inherited from the industrial era. Moving toward problem-oriented education that tackles complex real-world challenges requiring knowledge from multiple disciplines would far better prepare citizens for meaningful democratic participation. Schools and universities must consciously position themselves as builders of shared knowledge and common civic experience, deliberately counteracting the algorithmic fragmentation happening outside their walls. But formal education alone is insufficient. Lifelong learning opportunities must become genuinely accessible to all citizens, continuously updating the knowledge base necessary for informed democratic participation. Democracy ultimately depends on citizens capable of understanding their world well enough to govern it together, and that capacity must be deliberately and continuously cultivated throughout entire lives. The Republican philosophical tradition offers us another indispensable conceptual resource for thinking about how AI should be governed democratically, and that resource is the ancient but remarkably vital concept of the common good. Aristotle argued that political community exists not merely to protect individual interests, but to actively cultivate conditions for collective human flourishing. Medieval philosophers developed this insight further, and the broader Republican tradition consistently maintained that legitimate governance must orient itself toward goods that genuinely belong to everyone rather than serving exclusively private interests. Applying this framework to artificial intelligence and digital technology generates genuinely transformative possibilities. If data is the fundamental resource powering AI systems, then the question of who owns and controls it becomes one of profound democratic importance. The idea of data commons means viewing information created by everyone as shared public resources instead of private company property, which shows how we can apply the idea of the common good to our digital world. Crucially, the common good is not a fixed predetermined destination, but something that pluralistic democratic societies must continuously define through genuine deliberation and ongoing experimentation. Different communities will legitimately emphasize different values and priorities. The Republican tradition teaches us that this ongoing deliberative process of collectively defining shared purposes is itself the very heart of authentic democratic self-governance. We have covered extraordinary and urgent ground together in this exploration of AI's profound impact on democratic society. From the manipulation of elections through Cambridge Analytica-style data exploitation, to the erosion of personal autonomy through invisible algorithmic influence, to the destruction of social trust that Hannah Arendt warned us precedes totalitarianism, the threats that artificial intelligence poses to democracy are real, accelerating, and demand immediate, serious attention. We have explored how AI fragments our shared public sphere, concentrates power dangerously in unaccountable private hands, and systematically undermines the informed citizenship that genuine self-governance absolutely requires. But we have also mapped genuine pathways forward. Permanent institutional bridges between technology experts and democratic representatives, the inspiring framework of digital humanism, drawing on Renaissance and Enlightenment wisdom, fundamental education reform oriented toward shared knowledge and problem-solving, and the ancient but vital concept of the common good applied to data governance, all offer concrete directions for democratizing artificial intelligence before authoritarian patterns become irreversible. The choice between democracy and technocratic authoritarianism is still genuinely ours to make, but the window for making it is narrowing. If these ideas resonate with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video widely. Explore the book Why AI Undermines Democracy and join this conversation, because the future of free societies genuinely depends on it.